What's up, guys? Welcome to LearntoCode.tech. Today we'll be discussing the problem of the day, and today's daily problem is Flipper. Here's the problem. We want to create a timer displayed by these two time cards. The timer should increase from 0 to 59 seconds in real time and reset back to 0 before it reaches 60. Our task is to design these time cards using CSS and add the timer functionality using JavaScript. We'll be using CodePen to write out our solution. Let's do it. Okay, we'll get started by adding a base container class to our markup. And we're going to go ahead and define two time card classes within that container. Okay, so we have our first time card container class, and we're going to go ahead and add a span tag in there. And that's going to allow us to initialize the value of that time card to 0. It's going to be static for now. But later on we'll use JavaScript to define it dynamically. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this first time card and paste it so that we can have two. And as you can see down here, we have both of the time cards. They're pretty much sitting on top of each other, but we're going to want them to be side by side, and we'll define those styles later on. Let's set up a default HTML height of 100 VH, and that's going to be relative to the viewport. And then let's go ahead and add some styles to our body tag. These styles we're going to want to use to center our content both vertically and horizontally. And we're going to do that by setting first a min height to help with our vertical centering, and we'll set that to 100%. We'll then go ahead and define a flex container using the display property. And this is going to essentially line by default all of the items within the body tag along the main axis, which is row-based direction. Justify content and align items are two properties that are going to allow us to center our content. Justify content allows us to do it on the main axis, which is by default in this case, again, row direction. And align items allows us to do it vertically, which is going to be relative to the row axis, so that's going to be column based. And so we get two centerings, both horizontally, vertically, and that completes the body tag style. We'll go ahead and add the styles that I mentioned earlier now to essentially get the two time cards to be side by side by displaying flex for the container. Okay, let's get started adding some additional styles to our time card. We'll go ahead and set a margin of right of 5 pixels so that we can give them some space and a background color of black. We'll then go ahead and add a height of about 150 pixels and a width of about 150 pixels as well. Let's add a background, a border radius of, let's do 6 pixels to help make this look a little bit better. And actually, the height can be 100 pixels. No, actually width. We'll make width 100 pixels. Perfect. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and add some styles to the time card number. And we're going to first want to set this to position absolute. And essentially what that's going to do is going to position the element relative to the closest parent with position relative. So we'll need to set that on our time card so that we can position the span tag relative to the time card. And we'll set a color of gray for our time card number. And we're going to want to center that within the time card. So we'll do top 50%, left 50%. And as you can see, it's a little bit off still. So we're going to make use of the transform property and the translate function to align that better along the X and Y axis. Sweet. So as you can see here, it's perfectly aligned, but let's go ahead and add an additional font size property of 100 pixels. Perfect. Okay. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way that we styled these time cards. Let's get started with adding functionality for our timer. Before we get started developing our timer using JavaScript, let's take a minute to review the problem and consider our approach. We have two time cards, with the card position to the right incrementing by 1 every second. and the one towards the left incrementing by 1 only after the right card has reached 9. When both cards reach 5, 9, or 59 seconds respectively, we'll reset them both back to 0, 0, restarting the loop. The best approach when working on a problem like this is to first write out your plan, and for that reason we'll get started writing some pseudocode. We're going to first define variables. We want variables to represent our time card 1 and time card 2. So we're going to do define variables and get access to both time cards from the DOM. We're then going to go ahead and initialize all variables with a value of 0, 0, and we'll do that by defining I and j and updating those values within the time cards dynamically. Okay, so those are our first 2 points. Thirdly, we're going to go ahead and create an update time card function because we want to conditionally update the DOM for each value of I and j. Then moving forward, we'll go ahead and use JavaScript's built-in setInterval function to run the update time card function every second, and we'll go ahead and write that into our pseudocode as well. Okay, sweet. So now that we have our pseudocode, we can properly think about how we're going to build the application. We'll get started with the defined variables and getting access to both time cards by creating a variable called timecard1, and we're going to use JavaScript's ES6 let command to do that. And we'll do document.querySelector and to access the timecard1 class. And we'll go ahead and actually add that to our HTML because it doesn't exist. Currently we have timecard num, but nothing to distinguish each card from one another. So we'll do timecard1 and timecard2, and we'll access that using the query selector. We'll go ahead and add timecard2. We'll access that in the same way we did timecard1 above by using query selector, and let's just make sure that's correctly spelled up there. And so we're going to access that class timecard2. Afterwards, we'll go ahead and initialize according to the second point in our pseudocode, I and j. Those are going to be the values of our numbers that are going to be nested within each time card, and we want to update that dynamically. So we're going to go ahead and create update time card function, and that's going to conditionally update the DOM for each value of I and j, again, as we said inside of the pseudocode. The first thing we're going to want to do inside of this function is set our time card values to their corresponding I and j values. So timecard1, we're going to set the inner HTML equal to I, and that's going to allow us to initialize it at 0. So we won't actually have any need for the 0 that we set inside of the span tag earlier, as you can see. Okay, so first thing we need to do now is define the conditions that are going to matter the most when it comes to updating I and j. The first condition that's going to be important is to handle the situation when I is equal to 5 and j is equal to 9. We're going to want to reset both I and j to 0 when that happens. And that's going to allow us, after 59 seconds occurs, to jump back to 0, 0 and restart the loop. Once we've completed that, we can then go ahead and use an else clause to handle any other condition that we'll need to address. Okay, so within our else clause, we're going to go ahead and set up a condition for when j is equal to 9. We're going to want to increment the left time card by 1. So that's I incremented by 1 whenever j is equal to 9, or whenever the second time card is equal to 9. And actually, let's go here. We're going to want to also handle the situation when j is less than 9. We're going to want to make sure that j is consistently incrementing by 1 as long as it's less than 9. And whenever it goes above 9, we're going to reset it back to 0 as well. So this should sum up all of the conditions. We have 3 separate conditions, and it should sum up all of the conditions for our functionality here. we'll go to the fourth point and set up the interval. This is going to call our update time card using JavaScript's built-in set interval function, and we're going to make sure that it does it every second. And for some reason it seems like it's not incrementing, so let's do a little debugging here to see what's going on up here. And it seems like we're actually not getting access to our time cards. So query select is going to require you, if you're looking to access a class element, you're going to need to append the dot to it. For classes, we do need to reference them with a dot, similar to the way that we would if we were using CSS. And as you can see, our time cards are now incrementing by 1 on the right side. And let's check to see if at 9, the left side increments by 1. Perfect. And so let's actually test to see what happens if we initialize it. We'll initialize it at 58 seconds and see if at 59 it will jump back and reset to 0. And it resets to 0. So we've successfully completed the Flipper challenge. This is a very basic implementation. So what I want to do is go ahead and start coding up a more advanced implementation. We'll remove all of these conditionals and use some of JavaScript's methods that will make it a lot more easier and convenient to extract out the amount of seconds and actually display that on the screen. We also have a modulus trick that we'll show, and yeah, so this is the end of the basic implementation. We'll probably do an advanced one for another video, and thank you guys. Be sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.